The inception of the higher education business model can be traced to the colonial era from year 1636 through 1789. The purpose of college during this era was to provide an avenue of mobility for young men to become ministers and serve the maintenance of an elite group of public servants. Parents depended on colleges to properly prepare their sons. During the colonial era, colleges were governed by outsiders, boards of overseers that were made up of clergymen or magistrates. Funding was established from multiple sources early on, including philanthropy, support from legislative bodies, tuition, and individual college fundraising. This era was characterized by purpose above all else. From 1790 to 1869, the emergent era of higher education was characterized by an expanding nation and growing economy that placed additional demands on higher education to prepare young people for newly emergent professions and the development of a collegiate style that marked young people who had been to college with particular ways of viewing the world. Governance during this era was secularized due to the fact that few of the colleges were controlled strictly by a single church group. Hence, the colleges brought on anyone who could assist in keeping the institution afloat. Funds during this era came from private donors and the state, and students paid little tuition, subsidized by low faculty salaries. There was a belief that the community owed its young people an education for as many years as it took for the person to profit from it. During 1870 to 1944, the Transformation era marked a turning point for higher education. College served in preparing individuals for service in the professions and adding to the professionalization of numerous occupational groups' acceleration. College, as an economic generator in its own right, came to the fore. Governance during this era shifted notably in the direction of administrative hierarchies and bureaucratic management systems as more businessmen were appointed to governing boards in greater numbers. During this era, universities drew from both tuition and charitable funding, and private donations accelerated rapidly. The most prominent universities set up sophisticated solicitation systems and balanced donors' needs and interests carefully with those of the institution. From year 1945 through 1975, the mass education era was characterized by the expansion of public institutions, and more state-level coordination revealed how higher education was viewed as a public good. During this era, states built extensive college systems and accepted federal appropriations. Higher education became responsible for following state and federal mandates to a greater degree, and institutions functioned like businesses in which contending parties vied for a greater share of power. Colleges saw the decisions of their governance divide into academic affairs, student affairs, and business affairs. There was a shortfall between revenues and expenditures, which was caused by costs in all areas rising more rapidly than income and more rapidly than the rate of inflation. Institutions had little choice in the matter, and public institutional tuition might be regulated by the state, hence not easy to change. Private institutions could raise tuition only so much lest they price themselves out of market. From 1976 to 1993, the consolidation era saw the importance of higher education grow so much that young people who did not attend jeopardized their earnings and were locked out of the many professions and occupations that demanded certification. There was a steady secularization, and extramural influences continued to impact college governance structures. Trustees were responsible for overseeing everything from appointing and evaluating the college president to review of the institution's mission. In the decade between 1957 and 1967, expenditures rose from around $3.5 billion to $18.5 billion. This was due not only to doubling enrollment, but also government-sponsored research tripled, and state funds coming into higher education went up more than fourfold. However, state funds did not increase sufficiently enough during this era to accommodate for the rise in enrollment. Tuition as a percentage of total enrollment had increased from 5 to 8%. Evidencing the transfer of the cost of higher education to individuals and their families. From 1994 to 2009, the contemporary era ensued. The view that higher education was the gateway to employment became so prominent that the idea of its contributing to the public good had atrophied. Corporatism or managerialism defined higher education more in terms of business than of student learning and new knowledge generation. College governance structures and institutional planning and budgeting, matters formerly discussed by a governance board, were now being reviewed by all constituencies, often leading to gridlock and inefficiencies in decision-making. During this era, as seen in others, higher education struggled to determine its relative value. Efficiency was not valued in the academic marketplace, as colleges with beautiful grounds and extravagant amenities are the least efficient in terms of cost per degree, but students clamor to enroll. Privatization of higher education was marked by the growing role of market ideology in academic life, as public colleges and universities were encouraged to focus more on efficiency and outcomes and less on process, ideas, and community value. Legislators and taxpayers contributed to the belief that private institutions can perform better and more efficiently than public ones, encouraging legislators to reduce appropriations for higher education. Downturns in state appropriations led to sharp tuition hikes and intensified fundraising. For as long as students continue to perceive college in terms of campuses with amenities and professors and student interactions, the ability to reduce costs remained limited, leaving students and their families to bear an increasing share of instructional costs.